At TechCrunch Disrupt New York 2014. This is Rich Miner from Google Ventures. You were just a judge at the battlefield, which was fantastic. It's always great to hear your insights about companies. Question for you about selling companies. If any of these companies get to the point where they sell, you founded Android, successful sale to Google, and arguably in recent years, the most successful, definitely one of the most successful M&A transactions in terms of the growth of the product post-deal. How did you do that? So many M&A transactions don't work out ultimately, and the product goes away, or the people who are part of it aren't happy at the company afterward. How did you make sure that this worked out?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it was a little bit by design. Part of it was a good match between Google and what we were building. And then also part of it was just right place at right time. So I think it was a combination of all of those things, which you can't always align the universe that way. In the case of Android, we, as founders, we had a pretty clear vision of what we wanted to build. And Andy had sort of done it before with Danger, where they built a mobile phone platform completely. So, and the fact that Google gave us a huge amount of autonomy early on. They basically said, you guys, here's a budget, go ahead and try and build, and they let us operate almost as a startup inside of Google. So part of it, I would say, is the behavior of the acquiring company helped us be successful, but then also we just executed to the plan that we had, and then thankfully the market and timing was just right. We got acquired prior to anyone even knowing that there was an iPhone out there, so we had been thinking about an open mobile phone platform. Turned out Apple had been as well, but not as open, open on the app side, but not on the platform side. So the market desperately needed a response to that, and we had a response to that that was, had funding from Google, so we could build a complete platform and had, a team that we were able to quickly grow with Google's resources and brand, and sort of the vision for what we had, we could grow that team so that we could execute towards building the platform that filled that vacuum.
And that autonomy and growth going forward, is that something that you can negotiate when you're in the talks for the sale? Is there any advice that you personally give to founders that are in your portfolio companies when they're talking about sales?
I think it's, you want to look at other companies that have been acquired, and then, it was definitely a concern of ours, right? So we were very unsure, Google wasn't at all about mobile phone platforms. So we were, our biggest concern in looking at being acquired was, how do we know Google's not going to change direction and say, we're not that interested in doing this anymore. We're not give us the resources that we need. And back then it was actually, Larry, who was an early champion of what we were doing, prior to the acquisition, he suggested we talk to Jonathan Rosenberg, who was running all of product. And Jonathan basically, told us, here's how Google works. Most companies, when something isn't going well, they'll give it lots of resources. For us, if things aren't going well, we tend to not give it more resources. So if you guys want to succeed, the best thing to do is to be successful. And if you achieve your goals, those are the kind of companies that Google tends to give more resources with. So thankfully, we were able to execute along the path that we set out and build what we said we were going to build, and Google continued to sponsor and support us as that. But, but again, I think you want to really look at who's the acquiring company. Do they have conviction, or do they have a history of supporting entrepreneurs post-acquisition? And even in the case of Google, they've had some successes and some not as successful with that.
Right. I also want to ask about a big conversation that's happening now around big funding rounds and big valuations. There's a school of thought that is, when the money's here, get as much money as you can. If you're a startup, get as much money as you possibly can. Hopefully when you don't need it for later on, that'll be good. And money's hot right now, get it, winter might be coming. And then now there seems to be a conversation with big companies like Square or Box, they have to possibly delay their IPOs because the valuation is so high. And there's been a conversation of Fred Wilson saying that maybe they shouldn't have raised that money at that point because now they have to IPO or something. What's your take on this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, there's several topics there that you've hit on. So I 100% agree with Fred, and I often counsel entrepreneurs, just because you can raise money, and because you can raise money at a certain valuation doesn't mean you should, right? You always want to believe that you can build a business, even if you're raising ahead. And I do tell people at times, and you're seeing this in frothy markets like now, where somebody just raised, but maybe they've been counseled or they've hit inbound at a much higher valuation, And so they, they think about taking another round well in advance of maybe when they should, at a valuation that is, maybe it'll be a year or two from now. So if you're going to do that, you really have to be convinced that you're going to build the business to that valuation. And if you don't, that's where you get into the trouble that Fred talked about, which is some people who take the money because they can, and they haven't even figured out how to build the business to that level yet, but they're doing it on froth and hype. And there's a big concern about that, because then you do have the issue that any downturn or change of direction or the inability to build revenue or keep user growth going, those things can cause you to be in a situation where you need to raise again or sell, and at a valuation that maybe is going to be hindered by the post of your last round.
So sometimes it seems like maybe the entrepreneurs have bit off more than they could chew. But at the same time, when they were taking that bite, there were a lot of investors that were encouraging them to, right? These investors said, you could be a $2 billion company, you could be a $5 billion company. Come on, take this money, go big, even if they weren't ready to yet. So it sounds like maybe the entrepreneurs should just recollect and maybe listen a little bit more to the conservative side as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely thoughtful entrepreneurs that are always rationally thinking about it, but there's no doubt about it that there are VCs who think success is seeing a 4x or a 5x multiple over the time they put money in. And that's not success. It's building a company towards a successful exit or a successful IPO is what you should be focused on. And so, again, I don't think it's a bad idea to raise money at times a little bit ahead of, especially to your point, if money is available and capital's there and there's interest and you've created some buzz. But I think you should always do it within the limits and bounds of where you think you'll be able to get as an enterprise in a 12 to 18 month period. If you're raising beyond that to a point you can't even see, then that's maybe a problem.
All right. Rich Miner, thank you so much for coming backstage at Disrupt.
Great.